Hey, dude.
Let me present. Let me just get my slides up.
Welcome, everybody. I'll start in a few minutes as people trickle in. All right. You got the slides?
Yeah, trying to. How do you show present?
Well, I can start and then we can figure out all the difficult.
Okay, I'll take it over when you're done.
Yep. All right, everybody, welcome to our almost not August 2022 All Hands. We're talking about election integrity and how y'all can help. So very excited for the program today. Let's give it a slide. We're going to do some really brief updates on TFC, and then we can answer questions at the end about more specifically what we're doing. We're very excited to be joined by David Pepper, who's a noted commentator on sort of what's going on in the States, and then have Reva and Kyle chat with Lauren about paid advertising, digital advertising, and how you're able to help the campaigns and questions and problems that David will outline. So with that, I'll walk through a very brief update on what's new. We have 74 days left until the election, which is frightening every time I see this slide, but it's also the one immovable force of what we do here. Got a bunch of new hires. So Laura Oppenheimer and Colleen McCarthy have joined us this past week as two new state directors, and also have Gina, who's joined to lead our digital turnout program, and a bunch of other folks who are helping both on volunteer and part-time basis to make this all happen. So on the services program, where we're deploying volunteers to work directly with state legislative candidates, we've worked with 94 campaigns to date across more than 200 projects. We have a big focus on Michigan, Minnesota, and races all around the country to be able to make some gains or defend vital territory this upcoming year. We had a virtual fundraiser a few weeks ago with Pod Save America's Dan Pfeiffer, which was awesome, and he spoke very convincingly, eloquently, I may say, about sort of the intersection between the states, the power of digital marketing in politics, and then the unique intersection between the two and how we're able to plug in to help. Excited to continue to receive really awesome feedback from candidates, volunteers, and folks around the ecosystem with the help that we provide to be able to enable campaigns to communicate effectively and cost effectively with their current or future constituents. So again, for the map, big focus for us is Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania. We've got select campaigns in a bunch of other states, including a number in Alaska, states like Georgia, Florida, Carolinas, and a couple in Texas. Depending on sort of how things shape up over the next few weeks, we may add some races in New Hampshire and add some races in those states specifically. But the way the maps have worked out this year, due to partisan gerrymandering, is that the states where there was a reasonably fair redistricting process, like an independent commission or a couple other mechanisms, ended up with fairly competitive maps. And then, for instance, in Michigan, there's, I think, 2 and 3 seats away on the House and Senate specifically. And so there is a opportunity to really make some gains, whereas in other places you're looking to sort of play strategic defense, although the political mood seems to be shifting a little bit, so fingers are crossed. So that's kind of the state of play for where we are in the state legislative realm. David, you with us?
I am.
Welcome. Your camera's off if that's a...
I know. No, I didn't want to
There you go. You want to steal
You
a
see me
spotlight?
now?
Can. So we'll go into, but what we're seeing, this is a brief introduction to what David's going to talk about is the Washington Post did this graphic the other day of that there's 54 of 87 candidates in various offices that can play a role in the election have Republican nominees that have questioned the 2020 results, which is a frightening but very consistent statistic. We are working across a number of different campaigns where the campaigns that we're staffing projects for are set up to, or that you see on our site or that folks are actually volunteering for, are working to win against extremist opponents. So like Steve Jaskowski, we sent an email about today, who led Minnesota's effort to overturn the 2020 election, and just people everywhere. It's a thing that I'm excited to talk to David about, that is happening, and it's very visceral and real for our candidates. It's literally who they're running against, and so folks volunteering for these candidates, that's who you're kind of fighting against. It's not like it's particularly direct. So I want to introduce David. David, lawyer, writer, activist, author, former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party, novelist about the voter file and the Russia scandal. It's a very wide and extensive literary background, and was recently spotlighted in an article in the New Yorker about kind of what's happened in Ohio and what that means about the country more generally. So David, thank you for being here.
Thanks. Good to be with you too. Thanks. Thanks for all you're doing. I love the work you guys are doing.
Awesome. Thank you. So before we get into specific questions, like what's the elevator pitch on the situation we're currently in and what's at stake this November?
Well, what you just presented about these election deniers, it summarizes it. The only thing I'd say that's a slight amendment is this is not a new development. This is a continuation of a decade where state houses have become more and more in state level politics, as a lot of your candidates will have been experiencing, have been in a downward spiral of extremism and anti-democracy since especially the 2011 gerrymander. And I'm trying to, there's the book behind my head there. Laboratories of Autocracy. I wrote that in about 4 months because I was so freaked out by what we are seeing, but we're so focused on Marjorie Taylor Greene and Trump's tweets from Mar-a-Lago that we are not seeing that the true threat is actually in these locked down, gerrymandered state houses, some of which have been ungerrymandered recently by reforms like you said in Michigan, but most of which have been going through a downward spiral of extremism, corruption, and anti-democracy for a decade. So the recent iteration that you mentioned who is running is an extension and an acceleration of a decade-long trend. And I wrote the book to say, as someone who's lived it, experienced it, and seen it get worse in a state that has long been a bellwether of kind of moderate politics, is this is a crisis. And not to be disrespectful, but if Democrats don't see this crisis finally for what it is and go to where the battle is, and the battle is states and state houses, that is where they're attacking democracy. That's where they're attacking Roe. If we don't start really going there, and this is why I love what you're doing, and lifting there the candidates who are on the front line for democracy and get out of only thinking about swing states or federal offices, they're going to keep winning. And so that's the stakes. And those stakes are right before us in 22. People are waking up to it, but there's a lot of shifts that have to happen. And obviously we just got to keep rolling into 24 and beyond, always with the mindset that we are in a battle for democracy itself. That's the game. And that's a game that has to be fought in every single state at all levels.
And so Ohio, you're obviously, as the former chairman of the party there, and you've written and spoken a lot about this. So what does Ohio tell, since 2012 when it voted for Obama, like right. For folks that maybe from Ohio, but from other, like what's the story that it tells about how things got so extreme?
You can be a state that voted for Obama twice, but if your state house is locked up through gerrymandering and voter suppression to protect extremists, even a state that voted for Obama twice within a few years can fall into extremism that would rival Alabama. I mean, that's the lesson. And it's not because the people of Ohio are suddenly super conservative. It leans a little right. Obama had to be a very good candidate in Ohio. But let's be very clear. If you did a poll today, Roe v. Wade would be the view of 60% of Ohioans. Roe v. Getting rid of abortion with no exceptions would be the view of 5% of Ohioans. But our legislature is legislating on behalf of that 5%. That's why you saw the story about the rape victim having to go to Indiana. So what we're seeing is an extremism completely disconnected from the people of that state. I mean, you saw it in Kansas with if you have a general referendum, the results are very different than these extremist state houses that are protected from accountability gerrymandering. So the lesson is, and again, this is why I wrote the book, Ohio is a case study of how a state that sort of moderate leans a little right. It's, if Wisconsin leans a little left, Ohio leans a little right. That's where we've always been. But we're being governed by extremists because the system is broken down. And the case study is, Missouri went through this before we did. And other states could go there if they also, and we could come back, but we also keep going the other way. If again, the key though is wake up to it and start having the battle at the state level, at the state house level, where the other side has been waging this battle for a lot longer with far more resources than we have been.
What have you seen works to educate folks on that thing you just said?
I mean, if you follow me on Twitter, and I'm not doing this to plug myself, but so long books that are kind of dark and depressing are harder to get people to read all the way through, although the book has gotten read a lot. If Jane Mayer writes about your book, it gets a lot more attention. So that's my free advice is figure out how to make that happen. I was a mutual friend sent her my book. She liked it. I invited her to Ohio, and that's helped. But all kidding aside, I just think in every way. I mean, I'm on calls like you guys know this. You said to me, would you do a call? I said, absolutely. You told me what you're doing. I want to hear more about it. Mm-hmm. I think those of us who see the battle for what it is just have to keep talking about it. When I'm on Morning Joe, which I was on after Jane Mayer, I am with a tone of some alarm trying to explain this. I do 2-minute whiteboards about once a week with my Twitter following. Some of them go viral with hundreds of thousands of views. It's all about this stuff. So all I can say, what I'm doing is my best to get it out. And I'm also, last week I was in Indiana, their big conference. I was in Florida a few weeks ago. So for me, it's a lot of social media. It's old school stuff like writing a book, and it's a whole lot of things in between. I do a lot of podcasts, and this is one of the reasons one of the best parts about what I've gotten out of this is there are people like you guys, and like a group called the States Project, and like a group called It Starts Today, and like a group you all know, Run for Something, that are doing the things that we need to be doing. They're out there, and they need more support, and they need to be lifted more. The other side's battle, like your battle, theirs is a core mission. I mean, going into state house is the core mission of the Koch brothers and Alec. For Democrats, it's much too much of like a side thing. After we worry about all this important stuff like certain U.S. Senate races, which we of course want to win, the state house and the kind of work you're doing for too many is still kind of a project on the side. And so one of my missions in life is to see the best practices of doing what we have to do for democracy and move them more to the core mission of our side as much as possible. Because if they're not core mission and they're the other side's core mission, who's going to win? They're going to keep winning. So I get the message out as best I can. Others are doing the same. And then I do everything I can to find, we want to talk solutions, not just problems. The last quarter of my book is all about solutions, but especially helpful is finding solutions like what you're doing and helping people across the board see that what you're doing or others are doing need to be grown, invested in to be ultimately be the core mission of what we do and not just sort of on the periphery after we go win federal seats. Yeah,
I mean, I agree. How do you know if it's working? Like besides the tweets and like is it about money? Is it about mind share?
It's got to be about the infrastructure of the democracy side, and that's Democrats. But my hope is it's more than just Democrats. Has to start reflecting this broader focus, and people all the time, and they say it in a very negative way. And as having been a party chair, I'm not mad about that Amy McGrath raised $100 million. That was her doing her job. I'm mad that we haven't communicated to all the small dollar donors across the country that that's not good enough. That if we give Amy McGrath $100 million, but there are dozens of unchallenged state house districts in Ohio, in Kentucky, and Indiana, all around that $100 million. We're doing something wrong because she's probably not going to beat Mitch McConnell. There goes $100 million, but you divide it. Let's have her have 80 million. If you took the other 20 and gave it to all those seats in Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky and ran hard in all those empty state house districts, you'd probably win some, but you'd also be holding extremism to account everywhere. So I think people are starting to get it. I wrote the book because I wanted people to see the problem. The most recent poll, you probably saw this. The number one concern was the safety of democracy in a poll I saw just the other day in NBC. Now, one worry I have is a lot of those are Republicans worried that Joe Biden stole the presidency. So there's some that's some of us, that's some of them. But I don't want to just see people be worried. I want to see the broader infrastructure of the pro-democracy side start to shift resources and shift focus. So you hear as much about the was it the DLCC as you hear about the DSCC and the DCCC. That when you see a big announcement about all the spending, it's not only the federal offices. When you hear Elizabeth Warren after the Dobbs decision say, here's what we got to do, it's not only elect a US senator, it's go back to the states where abortion is being attacked and hold those people accountable for getting rid of it, because that's where they're doing it. It's got to be sort of in the framing and in the infrastructure. And again, this is a big ship we're trying to turn. And my book goes through 30 steps about all the things we have to do this. And free advice, that's far too many for anyone to ever really get their arms around. But I thought I'd put down every one while I could. But it's got to be not just the awareness of the problem, because, you know, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, they understand the problem. It's got to be enough vision to start seeing that we have to move the battle to where the other side is battling. And one thing I'd say on this, my guess is some of the mega donors who I'm trying to convince of this stuff when I talk to them would say, wait, you mean you want me to take some of the money out of the presidential election coffers and move it across states all 4 years? Well, that's kind of risky, isn't it? And I would say, well, I think that if you actually invested in democracy in lower level office runs all 4 years in more states, not only would you save democracy better, but you'd probably be better at winning the presidency. My guess is some would still say, well, who would ever do that? You know, my answer would be with the Koch brothers. That's what they did. They made that bet 40 years ago. Take a big chunk of money and invest it in an infrastructure that starts at the state house level. It's called ALEC. That's what they did. And guess what? Is it working? Absolutely. They have a lock on state houses, partly because they chose to have a longer game and to get out of only being at the presidency. We have to do the same thing. And when I start to see that big shift, Greg, happen, that's when I start to think, okay, we're not just worried about the same problem now. We don't just understand the battle. We're actually adjusting our battle plan accordingly.
Yeah, the other thing, I think that would be great for the audience, because this is not fun necessarily, but it is below the radar, is the independent state legislative developments happening in the Supreme Court. If you all thought the Supreme Court was done, there's something else coming. And Dave, do you walk us through
let me just draw a big picture. So
even from a legal point of view, like what is it? I
won't over legalize it, but let me describe. There are two things I really want you to think about to reframe in your mind forevermore. And some of you will already be there, but once you see it, my hope is you'll never unsee these two things. One is there are two battles in American politics, and this was in the Jane Mayer story. One battle is us our views are mainstream. We think democracy is intact. So our battle is about election outcomes. Let's go win some federal elections in swing states. And if we do, we win everything. The other side's battle, they know they have a minority toxic viewpoint on most issues, but they also believe that democracy can be subverted. They're right about that. So their battle isn't about election outcomes. Their battle is about democracy itself. And the way you go after democracy itself is not federal swing states, it's state houses. So we're battling federal swing states to get election outcomes and substantive results that we want, that we think are mainstream. They're battling to win state houses to put into place a minority worldview. And they're right, it is a minority worldview. And they battle not just in swing states, but every single state, every single year. And the point of my book is to say, if we each play the battle I described, who's going to win? They're going to win. They're always on offense against democracy, and we're simply trying to win enough federal seats to pull together a majority they're going to win. So one frame shift is their battle is for minority world point of view put into place by subverting democracy through states. We must win the battle. But number two, really important. So the front line of their battle is state houses. That's their offense. So when I watch U.S. senators get so worked about the Supreme Court, the court's the one doing it. The court's the one doing it. The court is a massive part of their plan, okay? But not because it's their offense. The offense are the people who pass the anti-Roe law in a state house. The sword in their battle is the state house. The shield are the courts. The courts are there to protect the laws passed in states that previously would have been found to be unconstitutional. The attacks on voters, the attacks on a woman's right to choose. The reason they need courts is to protect the handiwork of those state houses that are doing what they're doing. So that's what we see. It's like a 1-2, right? The state house law goes to the court. The new court under Clarence Thomas upholds a law that wouldn't have been upheld just a few years ago. The independent state legislature theory is basically, it's a theory that basically says, and it's a wacko theory, okay? This is wacko fringe stuff.
As a lawyer.
As a lawyer, yeah, that's my legal analysis of it. It's basically saying that in the world of elections, there should be no independent court review of a state house's work around elections. That the Constitution was written in a way that a state house can basically do what it wants around rules of elections and gerrymander, and that state Supreme Court has no business reviewing the legislature's work. It's basically saying not only are they unaccountable to the voters due to gerrymandering, but forevermore, and this is not the law today, the law is very clearly not this today, that state house's work can also not be reviewed or struck down by the state Supreme Court, that they are independent and they are the ultimate decision makers on a certain set of laws around elections. Going back to my theory overall, it's another way that the US Supreme Court would be basically saying everything's going through state houses. Not only can you not vote them out because of gerrymandering, but no longer can Supreme Courts of these states even strike down their laws. But, we know this. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court didn't uphold some of what the Pennsylvania legislature did. The Ohio Supreme Court in the last couple months struck down the gerrymander maps 7 times. The North Carolina Supreme Court, same thing. If the Supreme Court of the United States in that North Carolina case goes with that independent state legislature theory, they're basically saying the Supreme Court of these states has no oversight role with legislatures, which is basically putting these unaccountable and extremist legislatures on steroids with no check and balance. It's a lawless theory. The court, it's kind of what Trump was trying to do through January 6th. It would be a radical diversion from even recent court rulings that Roberts and Kavanaugh and others signed. The key to the whole thing will be Kavanaugh. I don't think Roberts will go along with this wacko theory, but Kavanaugh, I don't know. I think the others will go along with it. This was very similar to this guy, John Eastman, who said, well, if this was taken to the Supreme Court, we would lose 9-0. It's a similar argument to the one that Eastman said he thought would lose 9-0. So I don't want to be naively optimistic, but I also don't think it's a slam dunk that it wins, because it basically would be the end of any review of out of control and gerrymandered state legislatures. If you want to think about it a different way, they're not hiding. When I talk about the minority world viewpoint that these people talk about, they're not hiding that that's their goal. I mean, literally, they visited Hungary to see what Orban is doing there with CPAC, right? They invite Orban to Texas to celebrate his work. Well, what's Orban doing? He's crushing democracy. What is one of the most important steps in crushing democracy? Stripping courts of their ability to review certain things, like elections. That's a very Orban style tactic to give unaccountable politicians less accountability. So the independent state legislature doctrine is very much, it's a legal term but it's essentially the same kind of thing that wannabe dictators do when they don't want courts, independent courts, reviewing their work. And in this case, that would be around elections. So,
So my summary, and I think maybe this is
that was a
where I wanna
long
get into-
summary. I apologize.
Yeah, it's like we have a bunch of elections this year for people who are running often in fairly gerrymandered areas, and some not, which is also an opportunity. And these state legislatures already have a lot of power in setting these rules, and so with the court hearing this case, I think end of this year, and the risk of they probably wouldn't have heard it if they planned to do nothing, right? So it's like something is going to happen. So it's like whatever the risky situation we're currently in is going to get riskier, and this is kind of the last time.
It's not even the rule of law is gone in these places. If this, it's our, so it's the Ohio legislature has been found to have violated the Ohio Constitution, which 70% of us voted on 7 times. Okay. And we're all running around Ohio like that's insane. Like, how can they just do that? The independent state legislature doctrine would say, oh, they get to violate as many times as they want. In fact, no one even gets to review their work to see if it violates the Constitution. I hate to say it. I wrote this book in the end, believe it or not, because I'm an optimist and we can still fight this. But it essentially ends the rule of law for legislatures in states. Now, they already, except for the states where you reform gerrymandering, we reformed it here too. They just don't do it. We essentially have many legislatures that there is no accountability back to the people. They are no longer functioning democracies. As I write, they are laboratories of autocracy. But they still are subject to court review. That's the one check we have on them. This would then get rid of that other check. So they're not accountable back to the people. And if this ISL goes into place, they're also no longer accountable to the courts, it's very hard to describe how that in any way resembles a functioning rule of law democracy if they are subject neither to the people because of gerrymandering nor the court. So obviously, let's hope it doesn't happen. And one other thing, you asked me about how do I know people get this? And I was very honored that Lawrence Tribe of all people retweeted me saying this. There is something the US government can do about all of this that it hasn't done because the Senate has got a couple senators that will not, frankly, let the filibuster, will not see that the filibuster should not stop them. There is a clause in the United States Constitution, if you've read my book, and most of you probably have not, called the Guarantee Clause. And the Guarantee Clause in the Constitution, it's not an amendment, it's in the Constitution itself, literally says, believe it or not, that the United States shall guarantee a Republican form of government to all states in the Union. And by Republican form of government, they meant that the people of these states were sovereign, that the majority should rule these states. And they did that because Madison and others were worried that in the wrong hands, like today, state houses could no longer be reflective of the people. Today, they're not. Mm-hmm. And this was a power given to the government, not courts, but to the US Congress and the presidency to ensure that if there were moments where a state was no longer a Republican form of government, that the United States would actually require that they be. And this is going to sound kind of radical, but if this court says that the independent state legislature, I would do it before this, but if this, and by the way, the court has said that actions pursuant to the Guarantee Clause are not subject to court review. Okay, for example, after the Civil War, the Congress made the decision of when to allow Southern states back into the Union. Did the states' new constitutions meet the requirement of being a Republican form of government? If they did, they were back in. Courts didn't review that. I believe, especially if the court says these legislatures are no longer subject to the courts of their state, and we know they're gerrymandered, I believe the Congress should be very tough and say, well, if that's going to be how we're going to play, we are going to start to guarantee that they are Republican forms of government based on the following criteria of how they draw districts or something like they could do that already. But I think that the US Congress can take steps to lift democracy in states that right now they haven't taken. They should be doing that again now. That's some of the Voting Rights Acts before the Senate as we speak. But especially if the court's going to give these legislatures more power than ever, the US Congress actually has some power to cabin them and to at least make sure that these legislatures are in the end accountable back to the people.
Well, I will propose hopefully an easier solution, which is to try to win some additional races this November.
Absolutely. I mean, this is
but-
sort of long game, pretty dark stuff, but until we start to think that, I mean, that's what they're doing. This is how they are thinking. And I think that we have to be thinking about the near term, which is, yeah, win every Secretary of State race, win the state houses we can win, get Tim Ryan and John Fetterman and Val Demings in so we can pass voter protections and gerrymandering. But yeah, we also have to be thinking this long game stuff as well.
Fair enough. But it's a good pivot to our next panel of folks that can help us do that. So David, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciated.
Thanks, everybody.
Not always uplifting,
well.
but useful information. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks so much, David. Great.
Yes,
Well,
please.
so what we heard from, right, the importance of states is incredibly clear. We know that the power of state legislators is just increasing and will continue to. And we also know as digital strategists and technology people that digital is the best and most efficient way for our campaigns to reach their voters. And yet we also know that these campaigns are historically underfunded, and the little budget that they do have goes still consistently to traditional media at a rate of about 90%, if not more. And so I'm very excited to welcome Kyle and Riva to talk to us about digital. We've got two experts. Kyle is ex-Netflix and ex-Allbirds and works at a digital marketing consultancy now, Right Side Up. And Riva is a founder and president of her own digital marketing consultancy, that agency that I think Riva has been up and running for at least 10 years. Is that correct?
Yep.
So that's amazing, quite a run. And so what I want to hear, and both Kyle and Riva also are longstanding TFC volunteers. And so I thought what we could start with is just hearing from you two on one, kind of what you're up to in your day job and the types of projects you've worked on with TFC, and then we'll get into more of the specific digital strategies you've employed to get results.
Sure. Riva, would you like to lead off?
Sure. Yeah, I don't mind. So I, as Lauren mentioned, I'm the founder and president of Digital for Startups. So we are a full service digital marketing agency / consultancy, depending on how much you hate either word, because they both have connotations, and we do projects that are tied to both, basically specializing in performance marketing. So helping companies with search engines like Google ads, Facebook ads, really anything in the social media advertising space, SEO, analytics, and conversion rate optimization. So, that's a little bit of the day job. And on the TFC side, I've been team lead for 3 projects, including Christine Morse's campaign, I guess 2 years ago now, which is scary. So Morse Force, there's a bunch of us who are very, very passionate about that. And then I'm also helping on the social media team. So yeah, excited to be here and thrilled you guys asked me.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Lauren and Greg. So again, my name is Kyle Sharon. So I work at a consultancy called Right Side Up. We offer marketing help of all varieties on an hourly basis for firms from seed or pre-seed level startups all the way to Fortune 100 companies, and very flexible. Check out our website, rightside-up.co, and happy to answer any questions that come up from that. But mostly in my day-to-day, I'm talking to founders, I'm talking to, first in marketing hires, trying to strategize with them on what their needs are, where they're growing, where they're seeing challenges, and be able to kind of offer a perspective from my own career path, and then to try and strategize with them of like how to spend those resources, those finite resources that they have, to be able to deploy against the projects that they have ongoing. I've been with Tech for Campaigns since I think arguably the beginning. Signed up like right after the 2016 election. My first campaign was a Virginia House of Delegates race in 2017. For anyone that knows their history there, it was the one that was lost by a coin flip, and that turned the state legislature to the Republicans that year. So I always felt that campaign was like, if I just did a little bit more, maybe we would have gotten that one extra voter that wouldn't gone to coin flip. And my other notable one was the at-large congressional seat I think it was up in Montana with Greg Gianforte, where he body slammed a reporter and still somehow got elected. So those are my two favorite ones, but I think this will be my seventh or eighth coming up this cycle.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, let's get into it. I'm curious, maybe you can share specific examples from those campaigns or from your own client work of the types of digital strategies that really have worked. How about we start with you, Riva?
Sure. So, I mean, I think when you ask, what's worked, right? It's a question of kind of what were people trying to accomplish, because there are different strategies that work better to achieve different things. So, for example, I was working on a campaign with the Michigan House Democratic Caucus to try to do email acquisition. And we actually found that we had a lot of success through Facebook lead generation ads, which I've also seen work really well for a number of other clients who need to, especially if they need to collect email addresses or just kind of build a list, right? Those can be really effective for that. But there are other clients we've worked with where those didn't yield high enough quality leads or kind of didn't do what they were supposed to do. So I think it really is a matter of making sure that you're sort of testing and learning across the different platforms and just not putting all your eggs in one basket until you have the data to show that like that thing works. And I think we've definitely done a lot of that, a lot of testing and things like that with TFC. And then, with our clients as well to kind of help see what works. So that's kind of a good starting point, I think. Kyle, I feel free, go ahead. Feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, echoing a lot of that. I mean, just ensuring that like when you are starting on a campaign, just like asking what all those available resources are. So if you are sort of starting from a paid marketing side, like obviously, kind of these things around, whether it's, ad types like lead generation or building lookalike audiences, using seed audiences for get out the vote, et cetera. Just making sure you're asking all those questions up front. And if they're, a lot of times you'll find that campaigns just have never really encountered this. So like guiding them along through that process. And to echo Riva's point around testing ideation, creative ideation is so paramount. And that could be just simply like, what is that call to action headline? Or, what is the background color of a particular image? What does that like 3-second opener look like? As much as your creative support can give you to kind of cycle through those, it's so important. So, in the last few years or so, you've definitely seen much more of this, untargeted, very broad style approach. You're seeing that change a little bit these days, but that's still probably the best way to reach kind of a set target audience, especially within like a localized geographic area. But really what, if you're taking a couple different message points or a couple different pieces of creative and dropping them in there and allowing them to kind of all go to that same audience, most algorithms, I'm speaking mostly to Facebook, but Twitter or others will do a very good job of finding the subsets of audience of like, one message A might resonate with me, but B with Lauren and C with Riva, and it will find those that are, who it resonates with and be able to kind of spread from there. And then you'll be able to kind of pull the levers that say, put more budget here because it's resonating more. We have a little bit larger reach. So I'd say, in short, relying heavily on those creative resources to kind of like set that expectation and be able to get a lot of ideas out there early and then double down on those soon thereafter.
Right. But I think it's important to also make sure that you control as much as you can, because like all the platforms are kind of turning to be as algorithmic as possible, but sometimes the algorithms aren't necessarily consistent. So, we've done tests and then tried to, with Meta in particular, and then tried to like duplicate them and the results weren't the same. So I think there's a degree as well in kind of when you're setting up what you're doing and when we're working with the campaigns, right? How do we make sure that we're giving them the information to kind of control and make decisions in terms of like, this is who your ad should show to, like, don't make it too broad. Don't just pick the whole county and then assume that it's going to pick the right people. If this ad is about say the right to choose, let's target that to women in XYZ age group and see how that does first before we put it to everybody else, or they might need a different message. So things like that.
So testing is really key, right? But it sounds like both from a creative perspective and also platforms. One of the questions we have here is, have you been using TikTok or influencers in a political-esque context? What successes or learnings can you share?
I've not used them in any of my work, but I would say on a broader basis, having this, having creators speak about whatever it is, whether it be a product or like a particular point of view or supporting a particular candidate, I think is a really, really big trend. And it adds a lot of I think, credence, especially if someone knows who that person is, or they, they follow that influencer, or whether it's someone a little bit more notable than that. And that is, I think, going to be something that you'll see much, much more of in the coming years, of like less of these very generic, like static images and static videos that are feeling more produced, and relying a lot more on like the creator economy to create videos for that. So even if you're only using your candidate, that's a great way to do it. That very direct, like John Fetterman, go look at his campaign. Like they are killing that perspective of like having him talk to the camera. That is a very, very easy, efficient way to like get that style of content out there. And then as much as they have those connections, be it with other statewide politicians or other notable influencers or those that reach out, perhaps, like that is definitely something to, I think, pursue.
Yeah, I agree that I haven't tried it personally yet. And honestly, when we did the election 2 years ago, right, it wasn't really there to try. TikTok, at least, wasn't really doing this. So I do think it's something that we're going to see a lot more of in the coming years. And like for this election and then beyond, I think especially with endorsements, I feel like when people get endorsements, especially from social media savvy candidates, it's going to sort of turn into an influencer, what can you, and video type of thing. And I will also second that I've seen a bunch of candidates do really good. We had somebody in Michigan in the last cycle who had a really strong video where he talked straight to the camera, and it was what would be considered UGC, TikTok friendly content today, right? And it did really well. So I think that that being creative with your candidates is really important, and really thinking things that will cut through the noise and stand out and be different with that audience makes a big difference. For some candidates, there are things that play really easily into that. Again, someone from Michigan in the last cycle, I think, was like a firefighter. And so there was some really cool content that they could do around that, that kind of, I could see playing really well into some of the TikTok trends and things like that these days. And there's another candidate in New York who used to be a rapper. So like there's some fun stuff, that you could do with that there, right? Theoretically. There are other candidates where like it might be more of a stretch. So you definitely want to make sure it's authentic to your candidate. I think the worst thing you could do is push it with somebody who really, where it would be really awkward.
Well, maybe I think that's a good direction, Riva. Maybe you two would be willing to share kind of best ever. And I know it depends on what the results or sort of the key metric was for that client or campaign, but just curious if there's a kind of quick example, best of, that comes to mind. Kyle, maybe we can start with you.
I would build on the endorsements. I think we were very surprised. So I cannot remember her name, but she was an educator, ran in Michigan, ran for state, Dana Polhanke. And I believe she still serves in the Senate in Michigan. And she was getting just endorsement after endorsement after endorsement after. It was like literally no way to keep up. And we had the idea of like, okay, let's like put all these together. And we actually, I think if I remember correctly, got actually some local firefighters union, local welders union, whatever she was getting endorsed by, like had some quick interviews with those folks, and we were just like taking super cuts from those, and we sliced those all together with all the union endorsement logos and things like that, and just made like a quick 30-second spot, and that just did incredibly well. It was very, very low effort. And that's the idea of like just taking like a bunch of stuff you already have, maybe going out and doing some very like raw UGC production, and then being able to put that together and really just have something that you weren't expecting to perform really well, but it did, and it didn't cost hardly anything.
Yeah, we actually did something like that too, for Christine Morse 2 years ago, that also did really well. So I definitely agree that if your candidate has a lot of endorsements, cutting them together and having a way to go through them all is really helpful, because otherwise it turns into this debate of what do we use, what do we not use, what do we highlight, and different endorsements mean different things to different people. And so it was really good to be able to kind of get more out there. I think that was great. One thing that was really interesting too, I did a campaign in Texas in 2018. And one thing that was very interesting with him was the opponent had a bunch of interesting, I think, quotes and comments with Trump and things he'd done with Trump that were also very interesting and kind of things you could play up on. So I think it's important to make sure that you keep an eye on your opponent's social media pages as well, and just kind of have a sense of like what they're doing, because sometimes there are things that they're doing that you can or should respond to and or play off of. So I think that's kind of key. But my biggest thing is honestly just making sure that you do health checks on the accounts that you're running. We've seen so many things where just an audit makes a huge difference in terms of who are you targeting, where are you running, who are these running to, who's actually seeing these things that are being delivered, how are you optimizing, how are you paying. There are a lot of times where just checking a couple boxes differently, right, can make a really big difference. So I think the most important thing is to really make sure that like all of that adds up. And that's a place where I've seen huge wins for clients without doing, again, quick, easy, but like 1000% KPI difference.
Yep. I would add maybe one more that just came down as you were talking through that, Riva, is deadline messaging. So probably getting a little too close to the edge here, and there's probably only a couple dates to message, but just, if you do have a longer cycle, in future campaigns, or as much as there are certain dates around like when mail-in ballots are done, when early voting starts, et cetera, heavying up budgets there, not doubling, but just increasing the amount of like that would potentially go to a particular ad set or campaign, and just having really specific messages and ensuring like the candidate is maybe even focusing on like landing pages, or at least linking to like the state level site that has more information. Not necessarily like I would say like GOTV messaging, but just kind of like, hey, here's like this big date in bold letters, bold and numbers, and saying like, keep this in mind, circle this time. Found that to be very effective. The last cycle I was on in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and agreed. And I think if you can get that also to tie with landing pages effectively. I saw a really good one that had that helped you find where you could go vote, like the nearest, the candidate had a link and you could find where was nearest to you and where the drop boxes were and everything else. And that was really effective. And honestly, just very helpful, like as someone who votes, right? Like that's the kind of information that you really need to have, no matter where you are. So I thought that was really good.
Yeah, those are great tips. Thank you both. There's a question here that I want to address, and then I know we're over time, so if anyone has a last burning question for these two, please post it. Someone's wondering about younger voters disengaging. Did that happen in 2020? And what I want to say on that is just an initiative that we've been working on over the years called voter turnout, or vote by mail. It's sort of changed names, but the strategy is to utilize digital. This is a separate arm of TFC, but to utilize digital to turn out incremental, hard to reach, younger, more diverse voters through Facebook mostly. And it's been hugely successful. I think the last cycle we did this, we turned out an incremental 500,000 voters, and we found that we were able to do it in a very cost-effective way in reaching a younger and more diverse audience who otherwise isn't being reached. So I don't know kind of what the broader landscape is, but that is something that we're feeling very positive about at TFC. Let's see, any final questions before we go to our last slide? No? Okay. Thank you both, Kyle and Riva. I feel like we could spend a full hour just picking your brains. I really appreciate you doing that with us a few minutes today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a kind of final ways to get involved. We have a lot of projects. We're really in the thick of it. So are looking for volunteers. Specifically, we have a need for performance marketers and graphic designers. So please spread the word or sign up yourself. We also have a referral program, and there's a link there to it. You can earn points and swag and all sorts of fun things by sharing and signing up to join projects. And then we also have, someone asked a question of kind of the best way to donate to support these state races, these state houses. And really, I mean, I think what TFC does is determine which races we should be in, where we need to build, where we need to defend, where we need to flip or gain. And we've done that work and have, identified who to work with to get those goals met. And so I have to say, TFC is a great way of using dollars that then plug into a whole number of campaigns that are working on the issues that matter: healthcare rights, election integrity, gun safety, LGBTQ+ rights, as well as, of course, all of the kitchen table topics that really do matter. So take a look, get involved, and thank you all. Thank you to our speakers and to everyone who joined. We will see you next time. Take care.